Almost 20 years after the defeat of Elves and Edain in the Dagor Bragollach, the Noldor had lost control of the entire north of Beleriand and held only the strongholds of Hithlum, Himring, and Nargothrond. Gondolin was still hidden and could not yet be assailed. However, the deeds of Beren and Lúthien, defeating Sauron at Tol-in-Gaurhoth and retrieving a Silmaril from Angband, convinced Maedhros that Morgoth was not invincible. In the year 468 of the Years of the Sun, Maedhros conceived of an alliance that he believed capable of taking the war to Thangorodrim. Under the command of Maedhros, all the elves of Beleriand, as well as the Edain, dwarves, and newly arrived Easterlings, were invited to combine in arms and fight against Morgoth in what would come to be known as the Union of Maedhros. Unfortunately, the Oath of Feanor and the evil deeds done by the sons of Feanor to fulfill it caused the Union to have less strength than it could have had. For Orodrith, the king of Nargothrond, remembering the deeds of Celegorum and Curufin that indirectly resulted in the death of Finrod Felagund, sent no aid to the alliance. Against Orodrith's will, however, a small company under the command of Gwyndor went from Nargothrond. Their hope was to avenge the capture of Gwyndor's brother Gelmir during Dagor Bragollach. Worse yet, from Doriath there came only Mablung and Beleg, who wished to take part in the great deeds they knew were to come. For Thingol, king of Doriath, had in his possession the Silmaril, recovered by Beren and Lúthien, and the sons of Feanor sent to him a haughty demand for its surrender. Thingol, however, was both insulted by the demand and had begun to lust for the Silmaril. Thus, against the counsel of Melian, he refused to surrender it. As a result, Celegorm and Curufin vowed openly to destroy Doriath should they emerge victorious from the battle against Morgoth. Therefore, Thingol enhanced the guard at his borders and sent no troops to aid the Union. The Union's commanders chose to divide their strength into two separate forces to attack Angband. Under Maedhros in the east were gathered the remainder of the sons of Feanor, the elves and men of Himring under Maedhros, and bore the men of Amon Ereb under Caranthir and Ulfang, and the dwarves of Nogrod and Belegost. Under Fingon in the west were gathered the elves and men of Hithlum, the elves of the Phallus, the Haladin of Brethorn, the true elves of Doraith, Beleg and Mablung. The plan was for Maedhros' host, the slightly greater of the two, to march openly across Anfaglith and draw out the main army of Angband, after which Fingon's host would attack from the Eredwethrin and crush the armies of Morgoth between the two forces. They would then seal the doors of Angband and hopefully drive Morgoth underground forever. Aware of both the location of Fingon's troops and the strategy the elves hoped to employ, Morgoth sent a great force of orcs, wolves, and wolf riders from Angband to meet Fingon's host. Though great, this force was but a small portion of the armies Morgoth had prepared, and was ultimately little more than bait, for Morgoth intended for this decoying force to draw out Fingon's army, and then to strengthen it when Fingon came from the hills to meet it. But Fingon, wary of the guile of Morgoth, ignored the taunts of the orcs and kept his forces hidden. Seeing that the elves would not be so easily drawn out, the captain of the orcish host sent out riders with tokens of parley. With them was Gelmir, Gelmir's brother, of Nargothrond, whom the orcs had blinded. To provoke the elvish host, they dismembered Gelmir within sight of the Eredwethrin and then killed him, threatening to do the same with their other elvish thralls. Unfortunately, Gwyndor himself was in the forefront of the elvish host, and he witnessed the cruel murder of his brother. Insane with grief and rage, he broke ranks and charged the heralds with the company from Nargothrond and slew them, then drove deep into the center of the orcish host. Seeing that his troops could not be restrained, Fingon sounded the charge and committed his entire force to the battle. Here, Morgoth's designs nearly went astray, for the onset of the Noldor charge was so swift and terrible that the Orcish host was destroyed before it could be strengthened. At the forefront of the battle were Gwyndor and his company, and their wrath was so great that they burst through Morgoth's outer gate and slew the guard in the very courts of Angband. It was said that Morgoth trembled as Gwyndor's company pounded upon his gates, but surrounded by a sea of enemies, they became trapped in the court, and all were slain except Gwyndor, who was taken, for Fingon could not come to their aid. Then, from many hidden doors in Thangorodrim, Morgoth led forth his main host. Fingon's army was driven back from the walls of Angband with great loss. The men of Brethil that comprised the rearguard were nearly all slain, along with Haldir, lord of the Haladin. The fourth day of the conflict was the official beginning of Nirnaeth Arnoedad, and Fingon's forces continued to retreat with their casualties mounting. At the start of the fifth day, however, Fingon's forces were joined by Turgon, who had withheld most of his troops from the foolhardy assault. The phalanx of Turgon broke through the lines of the enemy and met with the guard of Fingon, along with Hurin, son of Goldor. With Turgon's help, Fingon's forces managed to beat back the host of Angband enough to begin an orderly retreat. However, the fortune of the Eldar then took another turn for the worse. For while Fingon's armies had been fighting Morgoth's forces on the plains of Anfauglith, Maedhros had been defeated by the armies that Morgoth had sent against his host. To make matters worse, Maedhros had been betrayed by Ulfang, one of the sons of Uldor, who had summoned a great force of evil men from the surrounding hills to attack the elven host. Reeling from the unexpected treachery and the continual assault of Morgoth's dragons, the eastern host would have been utterly destroyed if not for the valor of the dwarves of Belegost, for they were naturally able to withstand the dragon's fire better than elves or men, and moreover they wore great iron masks that gave them additional protection. These dwarves formed the rearguard of the eastern host and allowed the remaining elves and men to escape the dragons. Azaghal, king of the dwarves of Belegost, gathered his forces and formed a ring around Glaurung to keep him at bay. Such was their strength and the keenness of their axes that even Glaurung's armored hide was not invulnerable to their blows. Enraged, Glaurung struck down Azaghal and crawled over him, but with his last strength, Azaghal ran a dagger through Glaurung's belly, and the dragon fled in pain. With him fled all the beasts of Morgoth. In a solemn ceremony, the dwarves picked up their fallen leader, forgetting about the battle, and they marched his corpse home. Their wrath was so great that none troubled them. Their sacrifice allowed all 7 of the sons of Feanor to escape, though their host was routed and scattered throughout Osiriand. After defeating Maedhros, Morgoth's eastern host had made haste to join the battle against Fingon's forces, and arrived as they had begun to withdraw. As they engaged the retreating elves, the first lord of Balrog's Gothmog himself arrived on the field with his troll guard, and engaged Fingon in single combat. Fingon managed to hold his own against the High Captain of Angband, until the second lord of Balrogs named Lungolthin restrained Fingon from behind with a flaming whip. Gothmog then split Fingon's head with his black axe, and the field of battle was soon utterly lost. Seeing this, Hurin begged Turgon to escape to Gondolin and told the king that he and his men would cover the elven retreat. Hurin, and the remaining men of Dor-Lómin then formed a living wall across the fens of Serek, buying time for Turgon to escape with most of the surviving elves of the north. The warriors of Dor-Lómin were slain to a man, and Huar fell to a poison arrow through his eye. Finally, Hurin was left to fight alone, wielding the great axe of an orc captain two-handed. He managed to slay 70 of his foes, including so many of Gothmog's troll guard that his axe withered away from their caustic blood, which was ultimately his undoing. Once unarmed, Gothmog captured him and took him to Angband. After Nirnaeth Arnoedad, the ability of the elves and men of Beleriand to make war against Morgoth was broken. Morgoth's victory was essentially complete, as he had destroyed all the people of Hithlum and had scattered the sons of Feanor away from Himring. Morgoth's orcs razed all of Beleriand except for Dorioth, which was still protected by the girdle of Melian, and sacked the havens of the Falas. Nargothrond was also still free, but Morgoth gave little thought to either it or Dorioth, knowing that the two remaining elven kingdoms were no threat to him.